The Quiet Man's Arrival. A man walked into one of the nation's toughest correctional facilities with nothing but a worn duffel bag and an expression of unshakable calm. Everyone who watched him enter thought they knew his story before it even began. They assumed weakness. They predicted surrender. But what transpired over the following months would challenge every assumption about strength, courage, and the nature of true power. If you're ready to discover how ordinary people find extraordinary resilience in the most challenging circumstances, subscribe now and join us on this transformative journey. Marcus Chen moved through the intake process with methodical precision, answering questions with polite brevity. The correctional officers processed him with practiced efficiency, noting his slight frame, his soft-spoken manner, his lack of visible tattoos or gang affiliations. In their experienced eyes, he represented a familiar archetype, the educated nonviolent offender who would struggle to survive in this environment. The facility housed 1,200 men across 4 cell blocks, each with its own hierarchy and unwritten codes. Block C, where Marcus was assigned, operated under the dominion of a man known simply as Reese. For 7 years, Reese had maintained absolute control through strategic violence and psychological intimidation. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 240 pounds, and possessed a reputation that preceded him through every corridor. Marcus carried his bedding to cell C-247, a 6-by-8-foot space he would share with a cellmate named Jimmy, a middle-aged man serving time for fraud. Jimmy watched the newcomer with evident concern as Marcus arranged his belongings with quiet efficiency. "You seem like an educated guy," Jimmy offered carefully. "That's good and bad in here. Good because some folks respect learning. Bad because Reese considers educated types a threat to his authority." Marcus nodded without speaking, smoothing the thin mattress on his bunk. "I'm just saying," Jimmy continued, lowering his voice. "Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with Reese or his crew. Definitely don't challenge anything they say or do. That's how you survive here." "I appreciate the advice," Marcus replied, his tone conveying genuine gratitude without commitment to compliance. That evening, during the first communal dinner, Marcus observed the dining hall's complex social geography. Men clustered in distinct groups, separated by invisible boundaries enforced through collective understanding. Reese occupied the center table with his inner circle, a position that allowed visual command of the entire space. Marcus selected a tray and moved toward an empty seat near the periphery. As he walked, conversations gradually diminished. Eyes tracked his progress. Somewhere in the background, someone whispered a warning. He sat alone and began eating with focused attention, apparently oblivious to the watching crowd. The first encounter. The collision between established power and quiet dignity was inevitable. When these two forces finally met, observers expected immediate capitulation or spectacular violence. Instead, what unfolded revealed depths of character that transformed assumptions into questions. Stay with us as we explore what happens when true strength meets manufactured intimidation. Hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a single revelation. Marcus spent his first week observing patterns. He noticed the rhythms of institutional life: the morning count at 6, breakfast at 7, work assignments from 8 to 3, recreation from 4 to 6, evening count at 7, lights out at 10. Within these structured hours, informal power operated through subtle mechanisms of control. Reese's organization functioned with sophisticated efficiency. His lieutenants collected debts, distributed contraband, and enforced discipline. The system operated on fear, but sustained itself through perceived benefits. Men who aligned with Reese received protection, access to goods, and elevated status within the hierarchy. During his second Monday, Marcus attended the prison library, a surprisingly well-stocked room managed by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Patterson. She worked as a civilian employee, bringing books and educational programming to men who sought self-improvement. "You're new," she observed as Marcus browsed the philosophy section. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus Chen." "What brings you to philosophy, Marcus?" "I find it helpful for maintaining perspective," he answered, selecting a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Mrs. Patterson smiled with recognition. "A stoic. We don't get many of those." Their conversation was interrupted by Reese's entrance. He rarely visited the library, but his presence immediately altered the room's atmosphere. Two men who had been reading quickly departed. Mrs. Patterson stiffened but maintained her professional demeanor. "We're closing in 5 minutes," she announced, her voice steady despite obvious tension. Reese ignored her, approaching Marcus directly. "You're the new guy in C Block." Marcus looked up from the book he'd been examining. "I am." "Nobody told you about library protocol?" "Mrs. Patterson explained the checkout system when I arrived." Reese's jaw tightened. Men didn't respond to his questions with such calm directness. They showed deference, anxiety, submission. This newcomer's composure registered as either ignorance or challenge. "I'm talking about my protocol," Reese clarified, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Everything in this place operates through me. You want library privileges, you go through me." Marcus considered this statement with apparent thoughtfulness. "I wasn't aware the prison administration delegated library access to inmates. Mrs. Patterson, could you clarify the official policy?" The question, delivered without sarcasm or hostility, created an unexpected dilemma. Mrs. Patterson couldn't acknowledge informal power structures without compromising her authority, yet contradicting Reese openly invited retaliation. "Library access," she said carefully, "is available to all inmates in good standing according to the facility regulations." Reese's eyes narrowed. Marcus had effectively exposed the gap between official rules and informal control. The maneuver demonstrated either remarkable courage or dangerous naivety. The philosophy of resistance, true strength, Marcus understood, never announces itself through aggression. It reveals itself through principled consistency in the face of pressure. As tension escalated, he relied on resources cultivated long before these prison walls confined him. Discover how inner discipline becomes the ultimate advantage when physical power alone proves insufficient. Make sure you're subscribed to witness this remarkable transformation. Marcus's background remained largely unknown to his fellow inmates. He deflected personal questions with polite redirection, focusing conversations on present circumstances rather than past histories. This discretion was intentional, rooted in his understanding that mystery often provides more protection than disclosure. What his cellmate Jimmy gradually learned through observation was that Marcus maintained rigorous daily practices. Each morning at 5:30, Marcus performed a precise sequence of stretching and breathing exercises. He wrote in a journal for exactly 15 minutes. He meditated for 20 minutes, sitting perfectly still on his bunk while Jimmy prepared for the day. "You're dedicated, I'll give you that," Jimmy remarked one morning. "But I gotta ask, what's the point? All that discipline, that routine, does it actually change anything about being locked up?" Marcus finished his meditation before responding. "It changes everything about how I experience being locked up. External circumstances are largely beyond our control. Internal responses are entirely within our control. That distinction is essential." "That's some philosophical stuff," Jimmy said, not unkindly. "It's practical stuff," Marcus corrected gently. "Philosophy means nothing if it can't be applied when circumstances become difficult." This conversation occurred on the same morning that Reese decided to escalate his confrontation with the quiet newcomer. During breakfast, one of Reese's lieutenants, a muscular man named Dominic, deliberately knocked Marcus's tray from his hands. Food splattered across the floor, drawing immediate attention from surrounding tables. Marcus looked at the mess, then at Dominic, his expression unchanged. "Clean it up," Dominic ordered. The command contained obvious humiliation. In the prison's social economy, public submission established hierarchy. How Marcus responded would determine his status indefinitely. He knelt and began gathering the scattered food with careful efficiency, using napkins to wipe the floor clean. Men watched with mixed reactions. Some relieved they weren't the target, others disappointed by his apparent capitulation. A few troubled by what they recognized as strategic wisdom. When Marcus finished, he stood and walked calmly to obtain a replacement tray. Dominic, confused by the absence of anger or shame, found his anticipated satisfaction unfulfilled. Humiliation requires the victim's emotional participation. Marcus had refused to provide it. Later, during the recreation period, an older inmate named Raymond approached Marcus in the exercise yard. "That was smart," Raymond said quietly. "Or suicidal. Can't quite tell which." "Neither," Marcus replied, continuing his measured walk around the yard's perimeter. Reacting with anger would have given them power over my emotions. Refusing to clean would have created a situation requiring correction officers' intervention, marking me as trouble. I simply did what needed doing and moved forward. Raymond walked alongside him in contemplative silence before speaking again. You military? No. Martial arts? I've trained, yes. Then you could have handled Dominic. Marcus stopped walking, turning to face Raymond directly. Physical capability isn't the question. The question is whether violence serves my interests or theirs. They want confrontation. I won't give it to them. The calculated provocation. Reese understood violence intimately, but Marcus's approach existed outside his familiar frameworks of dominance. This misalignment created dangerous uncertainty. When established patterns fail to produce expected results, power structures become unpredictable. What happens when psychological discipline confronts raw aggression? Subscribe now to follow every strategic development in this remarkable contest of wills. The prison's social ecosystem operated on observable cause and effect. Provocation produced either submission or retaliation, each response reinforcing existing hierarchies. Reese had perfected this system through years of experimentation, learning precisely which pressures produced which results in different personality types. Marcus represented an anomaly. He didn't submit in the traditional sense. His compliance was stripped of the emotional surrender that made submission satisfying. Nor did he retaliate, denying Reese the justification for escalation. This middle position, characterized by respectful non-compliance, frustrated the established order. He's making you look weak, Dominic reported during a private conversation in Reese's cell. People are talking about how he didn't react. Some guys think it means he's not afraid of you. Reese's expression darkened. What do you think it means? I think he's either stupid or playing some angle we don't understand yet. Find out which, Reese ordered. But carefully. I want information before we move. The investigation revealed surprising details. Marcus had been sentenced to 3 years for civil disobedience related to environmental protests. He had no prior criminal record, no gang affiliations, no history of violence. He held advanced degrees in philosophy and environmental science. His activism had involved strategic nonviolent resistance that successfully disrupted corporate operations. He's a professional protester, Dominic summarized. Used to dealing with authority through some kind of passive-aggressive resistance. Reese processed this information with growing interest. So, he thinks the same tactics that worked against corporations and police will work in here? Seems like it. Then we need to teach him the difference between courthouse protest and prison reality. The lesson Reese designed was methodical. Over 3 days, he orchestrated increasing inconveniences. Marcus's commissary orders went missing. His work assignment changed unexpectedly to the least desirable shift. His personal belongings were subjected to random searches that left everything disarranged. Marcus responded to each provocation with remarkable consistency. He filed appropriate grievances through official channels. He maintained his daily routines without apparent disturbance. He continued treating others with consistent courtesy, including those who clearly operated under Reese's instructions. This pattern confused not only Reese but many observers. The expected breaking point never arrived. Marcus seemed to possess inexhaustible patience, as though provocations simply didn't register emotionally. Mrs. Patterson noticed the campaign during one of Marcus's library visits. "I see what's happening," she said quietly. "You're being targeted." "I've noticed," Marcus acknowledged calmly. "This usually ends badly." "It usually does," Marcus agreed. "But usually isn't the same as necessarily." "You have a plan?" Marcus looked up from his book, considering her question seriously. "I have principles. In my experience, principles consistently applied tend to produce better outcomes than plans rigidly pursued." "That sounds philosophical but impractical." "Actually," Marcus replied with a slight smile, "it's intensely practical. Plans require accurate prediction of circumstances. Principles work regardless of circumstances." That evening, the situation escalated significantly when Marcus discovered his cell had been completely ransacked during dinner. Every possession lay scattered and damaged. His journals had been torn apart, pages ripped and scattered. The breaking point that never came. Everyone who understood prison dynamics knew Marcus had reached the critical moment. He would either retaliate violently, breaking his pattern of calm resistance, or submit completely, accepting permanent subordinate status. But Marcus's response defied both predictions, revealing resources of character that transformed observers' understanding of strength itself. Don't miss this pivotal chapter where quiet discipline faces its ultimate test. Subscribe to witness the remarkable power of principled resolve. Jimmy returned to their cell to find Marcus sitting calmly on his bunk, surrounded by the destruction. His cellmate's face showed genuine distress on Marcus's behalf. "Man, I'm sorry," Jimmy said. "This is bad. Really bad." Marcus surveyed the damage with apparent equanimity. "It's thorough. I'll grant them that." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to request cleaning supplies and reorganize everything. What else would I do?" Jimmy stared at him with incomprehension. "You're not angry? They destroyed months of your writing. Personal stuff. Things you can't replace." "I'm disappointed," Marcus acknowledged. "But anger serves no purpose here. The writing existed to clarify my thinking. That clarification already occurred. Losing the physical record doesn't erase what I learned from writing it." This perspective, delivered without false stoicism or suppressed rage, represented something Jimmy had never witnessed in 7 years of incarceration. Most men who claimed not to care about provocations were actually seething beneath thin veneers of control. Marcus displayed no such tension. His calm appeared genuine, rooted in a philosophical framework that genuinely transformed how he experienced adversity. Word of Marcus's response spread quickly through C-Block. Reactions varied considerably. Some men interpreted his composure as weakness masquerading as strength. Others recognized it as legitimate discipline that might actually represent superior power. A few began questioning their assumptions about how strength manifests. Reese heard the reports with growing frustration. His provocations weren't producing the desired emotional breakdown. Instead, they seemed to be generating curiosity about Marcus's apparent immunity to pressure. "Escalate," he told Dominic. "Tomorrow during yard time. Physical confrontation. Nothing that brings the guards running, but enough to force a reaction." The plan was executed with practiced precision. During recreation, as Marcus completed his customary perimeter walk, Dominic engineered a collision that appeared accidental but delivered significant force. Marcus stumbled but maintained his footing. "Watch where you're going," Dominic growled, stepping into Marcus's space aggressively. Marcus created distance without retreating, his body language suggesting awareness rather than fear. "I apologize for not seeing you." "You calling me invisible?" Dominic demanded, the escalation scripted to provide justification for violence. "I'm stating that I failed to notice your approach in time to avoid collision. That's my responsibility, and I apologize." The de-escalation, delivered with genuine sincerity, disrupted the script. Dominic found himself holding manufactured anger against someone offering authentic apology. The situation should have progressed toward confrontation, but Marcus's response contained no element that justified the next planned step. Other inmates watched with fascination. This moment revealed something crucial about power dynamics. Dominic possessed obvious physical advantages: size, strength, institutional backing from Reese. Yet somehow, Marcus controlled the interaction's direction through nothing more than consistent courtesy and refusal to participate in the expected drama. Raymond, observing from a nearby bench, allowed himself a small smile. He was beginning to understand Marcus's strategy. This wasn't about winning confrontations. It was about refusing to engage in the game entirely, forcing antagonists to either abandon the confrontation or reveal themselves as aggressors against a non-threatening target. "We gonna have a problem?" Dominic pressed, his scripted lines exhausted but his instructions clear. "Force a reaction." "I hope not," Marcus replied simply. "I have no interest in problems with you or anyone else." The simplicity confounded available responses. Dominic could attack someone who had apologized and expressed hope for peaceful relations, but such action would appear unprovoked even by prison standards. Or he could withdraw, accepting what felt suspiciously like defeat, despite Marcus having done nothing triumphant. The unexpected alliance power structures maintained themselves through isolation of potential challengers, but Marcus's consistent dignity, began attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Men who had spent years navigating survival through submission and strategic invisibility started reconsidering their assumptions. Witness how principled action creates ripples far beyond individual confrontations. Subscribe now to follow this transformation of an entire environment. Raymond sought out Marcus during the next evening's recreation period. At 62, Raymond was among the oldest inmates in C-Block, serving his 18th year of a 25-year sentence. He possessed institutional knowledge that made him valuable to multiple factions without belonging exclusively to any. "Walk with me," Raymond suggested, and Marcus joined him without hesitation. They completed 2 circuits of the yard before Raymond spoke substantively. "You're doing something I haven't seen before. Can't quite figure if it's brilliant or if you're just lucky that it hasn't blown up yet." "Probably some of both," Marcus acknowledged. "You understand what Reese is building toward?" "I assume escalation until either I submit or respond violently." Raymond nodded. "That's the pattern. Has been for years. Always works eventually. What happens to people who submit? They become part of his structure. Not equals, never equals, but protected, provided for, given status above the unaffiliated. And those who respond violently? Destroyed as examples. Usually hospitalized, sometimes worse. Guards intervene eventually. Disciplinary segregation follows. But by then the lesson's been taught." Marcus absorbed this information silently. Raymond continued. "You're trying a third option. I respect that. But I've never seen it work." "That doesn't mean it can't work," Marcus replied. "Just means the conditions haven't been right before." "What makes the conditions right?" Marcus considered carefully before responding. "Consistency. Witnesses. And time for people to recognize that my approach isn't weakness disguised as strength, but actual strength expressed differently than they're accustomed to seeing. That's a gamble. Everything in here is a gamble. I'm simply betting on different odds than most people choose." Their conversation was observed by others, including members of Reese's organization. Raymond's public association with Marcus represented a development requiring assessment. If respected figures began aligning with the newcomer, the situation's dynamics shifted considerably. That night, Jimmy noticed Marcus writing in a new journal, replacing the one destroyed in the ransacking. "I thought you said losing the old one didn't matter," Jimmy remarked. "The specific pages don't matter," Marcus clarified. "The practice of writing matters very much. It's how I process experiences and maintain clarity." "What are you writing about now?" "I'm reflecting on how institutional power maintains itself through isolation. How people who might share common interests are kept separated through fear and strategic antagonism." Jimmy sat on his own bunk, considering this. "You think people in here have common interests?" "Everyone here shares the interest of making incarceration less brutal than it could be, of maintaining dignity despite circumstances designed to strip it away, of experiencing human connection in an environment structured around punishment." "That's idealistic." "It's observational," Marcus corrected gently. "Watch how people interact when Reese's organization isn't actively enforcing divisions. See how naturally humans gravitate toward cooperation when artificial barriers are removed." The conversation was interrupted by the evening count, but its implications extended beyond that night. Jimmy found himself noticing what Marcus described: small moments of natural cooperation, instances where artificial divisions seemed arbitrary and counterproductive. These observations began spreading through informal networks. Raymond mentioned Marcus's perspective during conversations with other long-term inmates. A younger man named Carlos, who had been forced to join Reese's organization but resisted, found himself wondering if Marcus's approach offered an alternative model. Mrs. Patterson noticed the shifting atmosphere during library hours. More men attended, and their conversations possessed different qualities: more philosophical, more focused on self-improvement, less dominated by the usual institutional concerns about status and power. "You're having an influence," she told Marcus during one session. "People are having insights," he replied. "I'm just asking questions. Don't underestimate what you're doing. This place has operated under the same dynamics for years. You're introducing disruption." "I'm introducing consistency," Marcus corrected. "The disruption comes from contrast with existing inconsistency." The challenge deepens. Reese recognized the threat developing around Marcus's quiet influence. True power doesn't announce itself through displays of strength. It manifests through changing how others think about strength itself. The time for subtle provocations had passed. Now, Reese needed to force a conclusion. The stakes escalate dramatically in this chapter, as two philosophies of power collide directly. Make sure you're subscribed to witness this pivotal confrontation. Reese called a meeting with his inner circle, Dominic and 3 other trusted lieutenants. They gathered in a maintenance room, a space temporarily vacated by an accommodating guard. The situation with Chen is becoming a problem, Reese began. Not because he's actively challenging us, but because he's making challenge look viable. Want us to take care of it directly? Dominic offered. Not yet. That's obvious, leaves traces, brings investigations. But we need to isolate him, break whatever's developing around him. One of the lieutenants, a strategic thinker named Luis, spoke up. The issue isn't Chen himself. It's that people are starting to see his approach as legitimate. We need to delegitimize it. How? Reese demanded. Show that his principles don't actually protect him when things get serious. Create a situation where he either abandons his approach or suffers consequences that make his path look foolish. The plan they developed was sophisticated. Rather than targeting Marcus directly, they would threaten someone Marcus had shown kindness toward. A young inmate named Kevin who was struggling with his first month of incarceration. If Marcus maintained his passive approach while someone he'd befriended suffered, his principles would appear hollow. If he intervened aggressively, his entire philosophy would collapse. Kevin was 19, serving 2 years for drug possession. Marcus had noticed the young man's anxiety during library time and offered encouragement and book recommendations. Their interactions were limited, but marked by Marcus's characteristic gentle guidance. The trap was set during lunch. Dominic and another lieutenant cornered Kevin near the serving line, their body language threatening, but their actions not yet crossing lines that would prompt guard intervention. You're the kid who's been talking to Chen, Dominic stated. Kevin's fear was immediately visible. We talked about books. You need better friends. Chen's going to learn a hard lesson soon. You don't want to be associated with him when it happens. Marcus observed this interaction from his table. Raymond, sitting nearby, watched Marcus carefully. They're baiting you, Raymond said quietly. I see that. Kid's scared. If you don't do something, he's going to get hurt. If you do something, you break your pattern. Marcus continued eating, his expression thoughtful but not distressed. After finishing his meal, he stood and walked deliberately toward the confrontation. Every eye in the dining hall tracked his movement. He approached calmly, stopping at a respectful distance. Kevin, Mrs. Patterson was asking if you'd finished that book she recommended. She's hoping to discuss it with you this afternoon. The statement was simple, factual, and completely diffused the situation. By referencing the civilian librarian, Marcus reminded everyone of the official oversight that existed parallel to informal power structures. Kevin, given explicit permission to leave, quickly departed. Dominic found himself in an impossible position. Marcus hadn't challenged him directly, hadn't made threats, hadn't done anything warranting retaliation. Yet he'd completely disrupted the planned intimidation. We're not done, Dominic said, his frustration evident. I hope we are, Marcus replied simply. There's no benefit to anyone in continued tension. The response, delivered without sarcasm or fear, made Dominic appear to be perpetuating conflict that Marcus was actively trying to resolve peacefully. Several observers noted this dynamic shift. Back at his table, Raymond shook his head with something approaching admiration. That was risky. Less risky than the alternatives, Marcus responded. How do you figure? Physical confrontation would have resulted in injury and discipline. Ignoring the situation would have damaged Kevin and suggested my principles are selective. What I did protected Kevin, avoided violence, and maintained consistency. Also painted a bigger target on your back. That target existed already, Marcus noted. The question isn't whether I'm targeted, but how I respond to being targeted. The philosophical demonstration. Marcus understood what many people miss. True strength is demonstrated through restraint under pressure, not through aggressive response to provocation. As tensions reached their peak, he prepared to reveal principles that extended beyond this particular conflict. What unfolds next will challenge everything you thought you knew about power and influence. Stay subscribed for this remarkable demonstration of disciplined resolve. The incident with Kevin marked a turning point. Men who had previously viewed Marcus with curiosity now watched with active interest. A small group began gathering during evening recreation to discuss philosophy, history, and strategies for maintaining dignity within institutional constraints. These gatherings were informal, centered around Marcus, but not led by him in any official sense. He asked more questions than he answered, encouraged people to examine their assumptions, and consistently modeled the principles he discussed. "The thing I don't get," Carlos said during one session, "is how you stay so calm. Don't you ever just want to punch Dominic in the face?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Of course, I'm human. I experience anger, frustration, all the normal emotional responses. The question isn't whether I feel those things, but whether I allow them to dictate my actions." "That sounds exhausting," another participant observed. "It's actually energizing," Marcus countered. "What's exhausting is being controlled by emotions, reacting impulsively, then dealing with consequences of actions taken without reflection. Choosing responses deliberately conserves tremendous energy." Raymond attended these sessions as an observer more than participant. Afterward, he pulled Marcus aside. "You understand what you're building here?" Raymond asked. "People gathering to talk?" "People gathering around an alternative vision of how to exist in this place. That's fundamentally threatening to established power." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm aware. Then you know what's coming." "I have some idea." "Will your principles hold when it arrives?" "They'll have to," Marcus replied simply. "If I abandon them under pressure, then they weren't principles. They were convenient preferences. Principles, by definition, persist regardless of circumstances." The confrontation Raymond anticipated arrived 3 days later. Reese decided on direct engagement, calling Marcus out publicly during dinner. "Chen," he called across the dining hall, "we need to talk." The room fell silent. This type of public summons represented serious escalation. Marcus finished his bite of food, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and walked calmly toward Reese's table. He stopped at a conversational distance, his posture relaxed but attentive. "You've been running your mouth," Reese stated, "teaching people to question how things work here." "I've been participating in discussions about philosophy and personal discipline," Marcus replied evenly. "Same thing. You're undermining the order that keeps this place functional." Marcus considered this claim thoughtfully before responding. "I would argue that encouraging people to think carefully about their choices and maintain personal dignity actually contributes to functional order." "You would argue," Reese repeated mockingly. "Always got an answer, don't you? Always calm, always reasonable. Think that makes you smart?" "I think attempting to remain calm and reasonable is generally wiser than the alternative." "Show me what you got," Reese demanded, standing to his full, imposing height. "Everyone talks about your discipline and principles. Let's see how they hold up." Marcus remained still, his expression composed. "I have no interest in physical confrontation with you." "Because you're afraid." "Because it serves no purpose. You possess significant physical advantages. Fighting you would result in my injury and our mutual discipline. Those outcomes benefit neither of us." "Then you submit." "I respect your physical capabilities without submitting to your authority over how I conduct myself." The distinction was subtle but crucial. Marcus acknowledged reality. Reese could indeed harm him physically, while refusing to grant Reese power over his choices. Several observers recognized the philosophical sophistication of this position. Reese found himself in unfamiliar territory. Marcus's response contained no element of challenge requiring violent correction, yet neither did it contain submission that satisfied the need for dominance. The situation existed in ambiguous space that frustrated conventional power dynamics. "You're making a mistake," Reese warned. "Perhaps," Marcus acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." The transformation begins. Something remarkable happens when enough people witness an alternative approach to conflict. What started as one man's personal philosophy began spreading through the institution's social structure like water finding paths through stone. The culmination approaches. Subscribe now to witness how individual discipline catalyzes collective transformation. The confrontation between Marcus and Reese concluded without violence, leaving observers processing its implications. Reese had publicly challenged Marcus, yet no satisfying resolution emerged. Marcus hadn't submitted, but neither had he challenged Reese's authority directly. The ambiguity created space for interpretation. Different factions interpreted the exchange through their existing frameworks. Reese's organization claimed their leader had shown mercy to a delusional idealist. Those sympathetic to Marcus saw him successfully navigating impossible pressure through principled consistency. Neutral observers simply noted that something unusual had occurred. Mrs. Patterson requested a meeting with the facility's administration following the dining hall incident. As a civilian employee with institutional knowledge, her concerns carried weight. "I'm observing the development of a conflict with unusual characteristics," she explained to the assistant warden. "Typically, these situations resolve through violence or established dominance. This one involves philosophical approaches to power that might actually reduce violence if handled appropriately." "You're talking about the situation with Reese and the new inmate, Chen?" "Yes. Chen represents no threat to institutional order. Actually, he's modeling remarkable self-discipline and encouraging others toward constructive engagement. But Reese interprets this as challenge to his informal authority." "What are you suggesting?" "That we monitor carefully and perhaps subtly support the more constructive dynamics that are emerging. Chen's approach, if successful, could transform block culture in positive ways." The administration agreed to enhanced observation, with instructions to guards to document carefully, but intervene only if violence became imminent. Meanwhile, the informal philosophy discussions continued growing. Men brought questions about managing anger, dealing with regret, maintaining hope despite circumstances, finding purpose within constraints. Marcus facilitated rather than lectured, helping people discover insights through questioning. Carlos experienced a breakthrough during one session. "I've spent 5 years being angry about being here, feeling like I'm wasting my life. But if I approach it like you're describing, seeing this as time to develop discipline, clarify values, become stronger internally, then maybe it's not waste." "That's precisely right," Marcus affirmed. "We don't control external circumstances, but we absolutely control how we interpret and respond to those circumstances. That power, the power of interpretation, is immense." Raymond watched these transformations with mixed feelings. Part of him celebrated seeing people find meaning and purpose. Another part worried about the inevitable collision between this emerging philosophy and entrenched power structures. "You're creating something fragile," he told Marcus privately. "Beautiful but fragile. What happens if Reese destroys it?" "Then people will have experienced an alternative vision briefly," Marcus replied. "That experience doesn't disappear simply because the immediate structure collapses. Seeds get planted. That's long-term thinking for a short-term problem. Most important problems require long-term thinking." The situation reached crisis point when Kevin, the young inmate Marcus had protected, approached several men with a proposal. He suggested they formally request that the administration recognize their philosophy group as an official program, providing protected time and space for meetings. Word of this proposal reached Reese within hours. He perceived it as direct challenge, an attempt to institutionalize opposition to his authority. The response needed to be decisive. Reese confronted Marcus during yard time, with most of the block watching from strategic distances. "Your little philosophy club is done," Reese declared. "No more meetings, no more discussions, no more undermining how things work." Marcus met his gaze calmly. "We're not undermining anything. We're helping people develop better ways of managing incarceration's challenges." "You're teaching people not to respect established order." "I'm teaching people to respect themselves," Marcus corrected. "Self-respect naturally leads to more constructive behavior, not less." "Last chance, Chen. Shut it down voluntarily or I shut it down permanently." "I can't shut down other people's choices to gather and discuss ideas. That's beyond my authority or yours." The statement crystallized the conflict's essential nature. Marcus refused to claim authority over others, even to satisfy Reese's demand. This position simultaneously denied Reese the satisfaction of Marcus's submission while refusing to compete for the power Reese wielded. The quiet victory resolution arrived not through climactic confrontation, but through subtle shifts in collective understanding. Sometimes the most profound transformations occur when enough people simultaneously recognize that different possibilities exist. Join us for the conclusion of this remarkable journey. Subscribe to witness how principled discipline achieves what force alone never could. The turning point emerged from unexpected direction. Jimmy, Marcus's cellmate who had spent 7 years navigating institutional dynamics through strategic invisibility, made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. During evening dinner, as Reese prepared another public confrontation with Marcus, Jimmy stood and spoke clearly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "This needs to stop," he announced. "Marcus hasn't hurt anyone. He's actually helping people. Some of us are thinking more clearly because of conversations with him. That's not threat. That's benefit." The statement, coming from someone with no affiliation to either Reese's organization or Marcus's discussions, carried particular weight. Jimmy represented the silent majority who normally avoided involvement in power conflicts. Others began nodding. Carlos stood as well. "He's right. We've got enough real problems without creating artificial ones. Marcus wants to talk philosophy? Let him talk philosophy. Doesn't hurt anybody." Raymond added his voice, his institutional credibility lending additional authority. "In 18 years, I've seen countless power struggles. They follow predictable patterns, produce predictable damage. This situation is different because Marcus isn't seeking power. He's modeling discipline. Big difference." Reese found himself facing something he'd never encountered: collective redirection rather than individual challenge. The men speaking weren't competing for his authority. They were simply suggesting that conflict with Marcus served no one's interests. Dominic, sensing the shifted dynamics, spoke quietly to Reese. "We force this now. We're fighting multiple people over something that doesn't actually threaten operations. Might be smarter to let it go." Reese struggled internally. Every instinct demanded reassertion of dominance, yet the situation's structure didn't support traditional enforcement. The men speaking hadn't challenged his authority over legitimate organizational concerns. They'd simply questioned the necessity of conflict with someone pursuing different interests. Marcus, throughout this exchange, remained seated and silent. He hadn't orchestrated this support, hadn't requested intervention. Others chose to speak based on their own assessments. Finally, Reese made a calculation. "Whatever. Chen can play philosopher with whoever wants to waste time on that, as long as it doesn't interfere with real business." The statement preserved face while effectively conceding the conflict. Marcus received implicit permission to continue his discussions without formally winning anything from Reese. The resolution satisfied no one's dramatic instincts, but served everyone's practical interests. In the days following, the philosophy discussions continued with tacit acceptance throughout the bloc. Reese's organization maintained its operations without interference. An equilibrium emerged based on mutual non-interference rather than unified authority. Mrs. Patterson observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. During Marcus's library visit, she shared her assessment. "You've accomplished something remarkable. Not revolution, not submission, but actual coexistence of different approaches." "People accomplished it," Marcus replied. "I just maintained consistency. Others recognized value in that consistency and chose to support it." "Will it last?" "Nothing lasts permanently, but the experience of it lasting even temporarily changes people's understanding of possibilities. That change persists regardless of external structures." 3 months later, Jimmy noticed Marcus writing in his journal during early morning hours. "What are you working on?" Jimmy asked. "Reflections on how power operates in confined spaces, how discipline and principle can create influence without requiring dominance." "You going to publish that?" Marcus smiled. "Maybe someday. But the real publication was the lived experience. Everything else is just documentation." On the recreation yard, Raymond walked alongside Marcus during their customary circuit. "You changed this place," Raymond observed. "People changed themselves," Marcus corrected. "I simply modeled possibility. They did the actual changing." "Modest as always, accurate as always," Marcus replied. "Individual discipline can inspire collective transformation, but it can't force it. The transformation requires people's voluntary participation." Carlos approached with Kevin, both men showing marked development from their states months earlier. They'd become regular discussion participants, applying philosophical insights to their daily challenges. Question for tonight's session, Carlos said. How do we maintain what we've learned here once we're released? How does internal discipline translate outside these walls? Same principles, different context, Marcus replied. The specifics change, but the fundamental approach remains consistent. Acknowledge what's beyond your control. Exercise complete responsibility for what's within your control, and maintain dignity, regardless of circumstances. As evening approached, the unofficial philosophy group gathered in their customary corner of the recreation yard. Attendance had grown from the original 5 to nearly 30 men. Discussions ranged across ethics, psychology, practical wisdom, and strategies for constructive living within institutional constraints. Marcus facilitated these sessions with characteristic humility, asking more questions than he answered, encouraging participants to discover insights through examination rather than passive reception of teachings. Reese, observing from distance, experienced complicated emotions. Part of him maintained resistance to what Marcus represented. Another part recognized the stability that emerged from people finding purpose and meaning within their circumstances. The block operated more smoothly now than it had in years. The assistant warden, reviewing incident reports, noted the significant decrease in violence within C Block. Mrs. Patterson's assessment had proven accurate. Marcus's approach reduced conflict rather than increasing it. We should document this, the warden told Mrs. Patterson. Could inform programming across facilities. Document carefully, she cautioned. The power came from authenticity, not technique. If you try to institutionalize it formally, you might destroy what made it effective. Marcus continued his daily practices: meditation, writing, exercise, study. The external validation or recognition didn't alter his internal discipline. He'd entered the facility with principles and maintained them consistently. The fact that others eventually recognized value in those principles was secondary to his commitment to living them regardless of outcome. On a quiet evening 6 months into his sentence, Marcus sat in his cell reflecting on the journey. Jimmy, preparing for sleep, spoke into the darkness. You know what I learned from you? What's that? That strength isn't about never being afraid or hurt or frustrated. It's about choosing how you respond when you are afraid or hurt or frustrated. That's the real power. Marcus smiled in the darkness. That's exactly right, Jimmy. That's exactly right. The story of Marcus Chen's time in C Block wouldn't be recorded in official histories or celebrated in institutional reports. But among the men who experienced it, the impact would persist long after their releases, carrying forward into their families, communities, and future choices. True transformation rarely announces itself with dramatic flourishes. More often, it emerges quietly through consistent principled action, witnessed by others who gradually recognize that different possibilities exist. Marcus demonstrated that power rooted in discipline and dignity ultimately proves more durable than power rooted in intimidation and force. His quiet victory was never about defeating Reese or changing the prison system. It was about maintaining personal integrity within dehumanizing circumstances and inspiring others to recognize they possessed similar capacity for dignity, regardless of external constraints. The most profound strength, Marcus understood, manifests not through domination, but through disciplined consistency that transforms environments simply by modeling alternative possibilities. This understanding, lived authentically day after day, became his legacy. Not victory over others, but victory over the temptation to abandon principle under pressure. And in that victory, achieved quietly without celebration or recognition, lay lessons applicable far beyond prison walls. That discipline transcends circumstances, that dignity remains accessible regardless of constraints, and that principled consistency possesses transformative power, exceeding anything force alone can achieve. Thank you for joining us on Marcus Chen's remarkable journey. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more narratives exploring the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Share your thoughts in the comments about how discipline and principle have transformed your own challenges.